try blah 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 blah. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Gathering More Leaves. Today I'm going to be taking a look at my Puritan ancestors who lived in Salem, Massachusetts during the time of the witch trials in the 1690s. This is also a story of a family that owned and occupied the same house for 10 successive generations. But I want to back up a little bit to provide some reference and some context to this. So years ago, when I embarked on my journey to research my family history, I encountered a branch about which I had very little information. All I knew was the scant knowledge my father had shared about his paternal grandmother. He could only recall her first name as being Della, and he said that her last name may have been Gaum, but he spelled it G-U-A-M. And interestingly, this spelling mistake turned out to be significant in ways that my father never knew. In addition, he mentioned that she came from Ohio and that she was of French descent. He described her as a French peasant woman, and I believe he based that on what he had heard from his mother, his grandmother's mother, his mother's mother-in-law, regarding his mother's mother-in-law. Following my father's passing, I decided to delve deeper into the history of our ancestor Della Gaum. My focus was on locating her in the 1870 and 1880 censuses records for Ohio. While perusing these records in the National Archives in Laguna Niguel, I stumbled upon Adeline Gaum, who was born in 1867 and was the daughter of Louis Gaum in Stark County, Ohio. And in my enthusiasm, I mistakenly assumed that I had found Della Gaum and that she was this Adeline Gaum. Then, roughly a decade later, I published my findings on my website, and it was not long after that, that my dad's cousin, Rita, discovered my error. And she reached out to me to point out the mistake, clarifying that our Della had been living with her grandmother in Stark County in 1870. And sure enough, the 1870 U.S. Census for Stark County lists Della Gaum, G-U-M, a 2-year-old residing with her grandmother, Eliza Gaum. And then in the 1880 census, Della Gaum, age 12, is living with her grandmother, Elise Gaum. So where was Della's mother and father? Her mother had died shortly after Della was born, and I guess her father had abandoned her to live with her grandmother while he roamed around to finding work and that sort of thing. In 1870, or 1871 I should say, he remarried, and he remarried a much younger woman, a woman who was 14 years old, and she lived in Holmes County, which is where Frank Della's father, Frank, lived. Or I should say Frank's uncle, Louis Gaum, lived there, the father of this Adeline Gaum, who I had mistaken earlier. They lived in Holmes County, and that is where he met Justine Blanchard, and they were married, and they had a total of 7 children. Well, I also found out that Frank was a veteran of the Civil War, and it was around this time that I learned that how to get a form. I think I may have gotten the form from the post office or the library. I sent that form off to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., the National Archives and Record Administration, or NARA. From them, I requested military service records for my great-great-grandfather, and in there, it provided us with the name of Della's mother. Her name was Della Pickering. And they were married in Wisconsin around November of 1867. Now, there's been a lot of question about the accuracy of the date, exactly when they married, because we don't have a marriage record, and we also don't have a death record regarding Della's mother. Della. We'll call her Della Senior and Della Junior. That doesn't sound right, but the package that I received from NARA, it contained a number of affidavits that were signed by friends and family of Frank Gaume, attesting as to when Della Senior passed away and where she was buried. And the purpose of this was that there was questions about Frank and Justine's marriage for two reasons. One, I guess because of the age differences. He was in his 20s when he married her and she was only 14. And then also, I guess there was a long period of maybe 20 years that Frank doesn't appear to have been living with the family. He had a tendency, I guess, to roam around in the West back when it was the Old West in the 1880s and the 1870s and the 80s and 90s, that period of time. There was an affidavit that was signed by Frank, and that was dated March 26, 1915. And in it he stated that he and his first wife were married in 1868, a date that is most likely incorrect. And but then he also didn't get correct the dates of his when his children to Justine were born. So he had a problem with remembering dates. There were affidavits from three other individuals, including Frank's sister, Mrs. Mary Saunier of St. Mary's, Kansas, all asserting that Della Pickering died in June of 1868 and was buried at the Catholic Cemetery in Louisville, Ohio. In these documents, the name Della Pickering remained consistent. However, three of these affidavits contradicted Frank's claim that he married his first wife in June of 1868 and that Della Pickering Gaume had passed away in June of 1869. An affidavit from Joseph Blanchette, who is Frank's brother-in-law from Holmes County, Ohio, in 1917 confirmed that Della's death occurred in June of 1868 and that she was buried in Louisville, Ohio. Another affidavit by Mary Saunier, filed at St. Mary's, Kansas, same year, concurred with Della's demise being in 1868 and her burial in the Catholic Cemetery in Louisville, Ohio. And the reason why I'm drilling down on this detail here is because I have yet to find in the records of the Catholic Cemetery, the only Catholic cemetery in Louisville, Ohio, of a Della Gaume or Della Pickering Gaume being buried there. And there may be, I'm not sure why they understand it or believe that she, or at that time in the 40 years after, or almost 50 years after the fact, would have believed that she was buried there when it appears that she wasn't. Now, as I said before, the reason behind all this paperwork was the government agency that was responsible for veteran affairs back in those days was questioning Frank's marriage to his second wife due to their age differences and the absence of ample evidence that they were still, in fact, married at the time of his death. And this all had to do with Justine getting a widow's pension following Frank's expiration. A decade later, cousin Rita made an intriguing discovery. She found a book published in 1884, housed in the LDS Library in Salt Lake City, titled Centennial History of Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania by Ramanthus. And according to this source, our ancestor Della, or Cordelia I now call her, or Cordelia Pickering, was the daughter of Corbett Pickering from Gibson, Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. The book mentioned her marriage to a Frank Gaume, and it said that she had died in Michigan, and that's all it said. It said, it listed out Corbett's, I believe, 7 children. She was the next to last, and it said that Cordelia married Frank Gaum, and she died in Michigan. That's all it said. So the information from this book had been confirmed by census records. Cordelia was age 10 in 1850, and that she was shown as an 18-year-old in the 1860 census in Pennsylvania. So that would place her birth somewhere between 1840 and 1843. For a long time, this was the extent of our knowledge, and I just realized that I failed to mention one other clue, and that was that in census records that I found for the DeBacker family in Kansas in 1900 and 1910 show, and I believe also in 1920, show Della Gaum as her father being born in Ohio and her mother being born in Pennsylvania. So that Pennsylvania in the census record was another clue. And I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but I think I've given you all the clues, and I don't want to sound like Ellery Queen, but I think you might be able to figure this out for yourselves at this point. No, for a long time, this was the extent of our knowledge. However, I was a little bit skeptical, only because the only thing that we had to go on with Cordelia Pickering was this one line in this one book, a localized book. Now, I did, and I was curious about what her genealogy was, so I did trace that, and I made a lot of very interesting discoveries. One was a branch that traces back to Massachusetts and has a connection to not only the Bush family, George H.W. Bush and George Bush, but also Barbara Bush and also Barack Obama. And I found that I was 11th cousins with Barack, George W., and Barbara, and I was 10th cousins with George H.W. Bush. Another family branch I traced back to Charlemagne. And then I traced back a branch to a man named John Pickering of Salem, Massachusetts. So I was a little bit skeptical, but I was still curious enough to want to go and document as much as I could regarding Cordelia Pickering's family. Then around 2020, I had my DNA done by Ancestry.com. And when I got back my DNA results, the first thing I did was I turned to the throughline section of Ancestry.com's DNA results to assess my connection to Della Pickering and her father, Corbett. And through lines generated by Ancestry that links individuals through publicly available family trees of other people who have done their DNA through Ancestry and who have it documented there and have their family tree documented. And this, by the through lines, does a data comparison, and it showed me all these different connections. And they examining, and when I examined the through line results for Corbett Pickering, it dispelled any doubts that I had. All my skepticism was gone. It showed my close cousins, of course, who were descendants of my great grandmother Della Gaum, and her mother, as well as individuals claiming descent from Corbett Pickering's siblings. So beyond the 11 DNA matches listed under Cordelia Pickering, we also identified whom each of us had identified as Delagam's mother, the report added 13 more DNA matches through coming from her father, Corbett. And then going back one more generation to Delagam's great-grandfather, the report unveiled 10 fifth cousins, with our most recent common ancestor being my fourth great-grandfather, Jotham Pickering, whom I'll talk about some more in a little bit. These DNA matches were significant as our sole connection to the Pickering family of Pennsylvania had initially relied on a single line of text in this obscure, locally focused book from the late 19th century, the Susquehanna history book. And that book is available and it's accessible and it's searchable through Google Books. Well, whereas a couple of decades ago, accessing it required a visit by my cousin to an out-of-state library. Thanks to Google Books, I've gained even more access to information about the Pickering family in Pennsylvania. As I mentioned earlier, the Pickering family of Corbett Pickering had moved to Pennsylvania from Massachusetts. And Jotham Pickering, his father, was a Revolutionary War veteran who was born in Mendon, Massachusetts. And Jotham's grandfather, Edward, came from Salem. And this journey ultimately led me to Edward's grandfather, John Pickering of Salem, who I'm going to discuss in the next episode. I've run out of time for this episode, so if you liked it, be sure to hit the like button down below and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.